that, I can take any questions you might have. Yes.
Two things. One, healthcare. I do healthcare lending. I will tell you there's scared to no end, and it's going to have a significant impact on the economy and trickle down across the board. Second, taxing policies. Currently, what does that look like? How is that affecting the economy and those projections?
On healthcare and taxes. Are you referring to just healthcare employment, or are you looking at reform, the reform story?
Well, if the reform bill, I guess I should be specific, if the reform bill comes across with the national healthcare system, all my doctors and hospitals that I deal with for that matter don't want to do anything right now. Because if that takes effect, it's going to kill their bottom line.
Yeah.
Unquestionably. The trickle down to that is everything that supports healthcare. Just as the auto industry, it's interesting to even talk about the auto industry, it doesn't seem like it's coming back anytime in the near future.
Right.
And the trickle down effect of that, how does that factor into the recovery? Or do we possibly, I hate to say the word, not recover and go back because of that to a recession?
Well, we don't think we're going to go back into a recession, but there's a lot of people out there that think that that very well may happen. You might have this double dip sort of recession. So once you get all this stimulus fades and it becomes a drag, that GDP growth could possibly turn negative again. That's certainly a fair risk to discuss, and I think it's absolutely valid. Healthcare reform, yeah, I mean, it certainly depends on what kind of shape that ends up taking, but yeah, I mean, you could see some very big losses in employment, and especially places where you have a lot of you have a big uninsured population or an elderly population. You look at Medicare and Medicaid that could really get hurt. Most of that tends to be, if you look at across the nation, across the space, the South and the West have the biggest uninsured populations. Usually, I mean, a lot of it depends on the poverty level, the income level of the area. So obviously the higher income areas tend to will do a little better under that circumstance. But yeah, there's no question it's going to be a painful adjustment to go through, probably no matter what form it takes. The auto industry, you're right, this is sort of a secular decline that's been going on for decades, and we don't expect that that's going to turn around. GM, you know, it's actually the government owns most of GM right now, right? So they're implicitly saying they're not going to let GM go under. They've already said it. There's probably no way they're going to let that happen. But what it means for jobs, I mean, it's absolutely decimating these economies in Michigan and in parts of the industrial Midwest. I was looking at, talking about house prices, and everybody talks about California and Nevada. You look at some of the housing markets in Michigan around Detroit. It's unbelievable. Like, I was looking this morning, talking to a reporter, Saginaw, Michigan, which is south of Detroit, and has GM as the largest employer. It's pretty much the only shop in town. House prices right now, the median house price is $30,000. It's fallen 75% from the peak. So you talk about people in Orlando, you talk about people in Tampa. I mean, that's unbelievable. I mean, you have just this mass exodus of people, and it's really not clear what's going to pick up the slack for that. A lot of those economies are sort of placing all their chips on alternative energy. There's a lot of wind power projects going on in the Great Lakes region, but there's no way that that's going to make up for the number of jobs or the wages being lost, and even if it does eventually, it's going to take decades, I think, for something like that to come along. So I think nationally, at least for now, I think we're okay in terms of that being a national risk to the economy. Certainly if you live in a place that's dependent on the US auto industry, then it's a whole different story. But in terms of the national recession, we don't place that high among one of the big reasons why you could have a double dip. Yes?
Would you comment on the coming commercial real estate drop?
Yeah.
People I call on a lot of retailers, and you go through these local malls here. Chester County is the best, and I've been walking through strip malls with 4 and 5 empty stores. I'm wondering how those landlords are paying their mortgages.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a slide in here on commercial real estate, but I had to condense this to have time. This is sort of it's like the new housing market. I mean, really the crisis in commercial real estate is coming to its fore now, where you're seeing a lot of those non-performing loans, and as I mentioned, that's a lot of the reason why you're seeing a lot of these smaller regional banks being declared insolvent by the FDIC and taken over. It's mainly because of commercial real estate loans and land development loans on their books. The good thing, at least for the broader economy, is that in terms of GDP growth, in terms of fixed investment, commercial is much, much smaller than residential. So you certainly are having a commercial real estate crisis in a lot of areas where there's virtually no lending, no financing available, very high vacancy rates. But in terms of endangering the broader economy, the risk is really from the residential side, not the commercial side. Even if you have, a major event in commercial real estate where you have a lot of these loans go belly up across the country, which they are, I don't think that puts the broader financial, well, maybe I shouldn't say that because nobody said that, in 2007 when they were talking about residential mortgage loans, but it's a much smaller piece of the puzzle, like 20% versus 80% residential. So in terms of risks to the broader economy, it's small. But yeah, that is becoming a major problem. I cover the New York City economy, vacancy rates there. They're actually still very low, but vacancy rates are just soaring. Nobody can get loans, nobody can get financing. It's almost virtually non-existent, sort of a couple of steps behind the residential market. So the recovery there is probably at least a year, if not a year and a half off. Yes?
Speaking of the residential mortgage market, to the extent that a lot of mortgages were being granted that were, say, questionable in terms of the qualifications of the borrowers, do you see that being a drag on the recovery of the housing market going forward, that people just aren't going to be able to qualify?
Yeah,
Is it going to be tougher?
Yeah, and I think we're already seeing that play out. We're already seeing that credit standards, which we thought would be a little bit looser by this point, are in fact getting even tighter, at least according to these Federal Reserve surveys that we're seeing. When you actually talk to people, it's sort of a mixed picture. I know a lot of people that have bought homes recently that said, oh, I have no problem getting a loan. These people probably have very good credit. And you have to remember that much of the growth in the housing market was fueled because there was lending to people that just were in homes that they simply couldn't afford. So you're right. This is a big drag actually on the housing market recovery, and that's why we have all these federal programs, the first-time home buyer tax credit, mortgage modification plans. We have the Federal Reserve keeping interest rates low, trying to juice up that housing market, but it's really only juicing it up for the people that are lucky enough to still have a job and be able to buy a house, but also that have the credit to afford it. So yeah, it's certainly a longer recovery period because credit is so much tighter, for sure. And then given the fact that you still have all these foreclosures coming on in certain, and I really think this probably varies by geography. I would imagine that credit standards are probably a lot tighter in Fresno, California, than they are here, for example. Lenders are just so spooked. So yeah, it certainly draws out the time to recovery. And we think also once home prices start rising again and sales start rising again, it's going to be really slow. We're not talking about a surge back in the housing market. Prices maybe grow 3 to 4% a year versus the 20% that they were growing a year going into this. Yes.
I had a comment with respect to commercial real estate and I'm in commercial real estate as a matter of disclosure. With owner-occupied properties, you typically have the power, the strength of the underlying business to back that asset, which in most cases is more strictly underwritten than say a residential mortgage. And on the investment side, you don't have the leverage that you have with residential mortgages. So I just want to echo your point that the fallout probably won't be as bad. At least I hope not. But there's different dynamics at play.
Yeah.